My esteemed friends, welcome to my channel. I am Alexander Mosienko. Today is May 23rd, Friday, and I present to you my traditional morning briefing on the events that I consider relevant, important, and worthy of your esteemed attention. As always, there is plenty to talk about. I apologize in advance for my voice. Something went wrong with it this morning on May 23rd. Well, there's a lot going on right now, plenty of responsibilities, especially with my service duties, so maybe I've caught a bit of something, but that definitely won't stop us from discussing the most important topics happening at the moment and what truly deserves our attention. So, once again, it was restless on Russian territory last night. Drones attacked Russian territory and once again reached the Moscow region. This is not the first time we've seen these kinds of results. And this is very important because if we look at the targets of such drone attacks, everything is happening just as I said before, that it is promising for us to strike precisely at the facilities of the Russian military-industrial complex. This is very important because it is precisely there that weapons are produced. Equipment is manufactured as well as other equipment, and it is there that Russia essentially makes the decisions to continue this war against Ukraine, so it is absolutely crucial. Excuse me, please. So, it is important to strike and destroy these facilities, and this will help us. In other words, the enemy is concentrating its production capabilities that are directed toward the war. Obviously, these production capabilities need to be targeted everywhere Ukrainian UAVs can reach. And so, we are discussing the specific results from this week with you, and I explain why every morning I start with reports on our drones' strikes against Russian systems, the Russian military-industrial complex. Because this is very important, it is necessary, and we have positive news here. So, on the night of May 22nd, during a UAV attack on the Tula region, one of the active workshops of the NPO Splav was hit. This enterprise belongs to Rostec and is a manufacturer of multiple launch rocket systems, air-launched missiles, heavy machine gun systems, and ammunition for them. After the drone debris fell, the workshop caught fire. A fire also broke out at an electrical substation. 3 days ago, Putin awarded 4 employees of Splav the Marshal Zhukov Prize for 2025 in the field of armaments and military equipment. Splav was attacked on May 7th. At that time, a multiple rocket launcher production workshop was hit, and it was attacked again on May 22nd. So this is not just about making a symbolic strike or checking off a box, so to speak. No, the point is, and the task set before our defense forces of Ukraine is to strike and achieve a practical result. Destruction, fire, and consequently the destruction of production facilities that enable Russia to maintain its capabilities. It's very important to strike precisely such targets of the military-industrial complex, the production capacities of the aggressor. And I believe that our forces will not slow down their efforts. We must understand that the war will continue, and that is a fact. Whether someone likes it or not, it will last at least until the end of this year. Putin clearly declares that he does not want peace. He does not want a ceasefire. And that means one of the tasks facing the defense forces to reduce the enemy's offensive potential, to inflict maximum losses on them, remains unchanged. It is still relevant for the units of our Ukrainian defense forces. And of course, our forces will focus in particular on targeting the military industry. This concerns the aggressor. It is something we are simply obliged to focus on. Deep strikes. There are capabilities. We can see that technologies are developing and they are only scaling up. And this is one of the tools that can truly bring us a very important victory at the very least, forcing Russia to cease fire and agree to a prolonged ceasefire. Only in this way, while the United States of America continues to deliberate and build various formats. Well, for example, Simon Schuster, the author of the publication and the book The Showman, a writer for Time magazine who often visits Ukraine, is very well informed and has a large number of sources. He wrote in a column for Time that Trump recently suggested to Zelensky to immediately start negotiations with Russia, forgetting that just a few days earlier they had already begun in Turkey. And according to Schuster's sources, when Ukrainian President Zelensky told Trump that, listen, the negotiations are not continuing in Istanbul, there was a pause of at least 15 seconds. In other words, Schuster insists that Trump is only superficially interested in foreign policy. The most he reads is an intelligence report from special services, which they condense for him daily onto a single A4 sheet, even diluting it with photos to, let's say, make it easier to grasp visually, probably for these reasons. But actually, this is the situation, and I think that this publication, this column by Schuster for the Times, is in many ways eloquent and probably demonstrates what we suspected with you, that this is the case, and that in some places Trump really doesn't get into the details. And look, we even see this after Trump calls Putin, and how some kind of manic dependence appears, like the dependence of the victim on the maniac. And that's it. And he is so, you see, when you are well formed and you have some kind of foundation, well, yes, people can tell you things, but your convictions will remain with you. Your knowledge, your professional experience, your understanding of the situation. But when here, well, it's broad, let's put it that way. Here, everywhere it's quite broad, and there is always room to sow seeds. Then you can sow a lot, including things that shouldn't be sown, which is exactly what Putin does. He sows what he needs there. And Trump, in turn, is attentive in this sense and a grateful listener, grateful to Putin, unfortunately, and he continues to take in this information, to absorb it like a sponge, in fact, and then to retransmit it. Well, that's basically the situation. Meanwhile, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, held a briefing and telephone consultations with the leaders of Greece, North Macedonia, and Moldova. Prior to this, the president had a phone conversation with the president of Serbia, Vučić, during which they discussed support for Ukraine, pressure on Russia, as well as preparations for the upcoming Ukraine Southeast Europe summit. During the discussion with the Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, special attention was given to the need to strengthen sanctions against Russia and to continue international pressure. Zelensky also emphasized the importance of assistance in developing Ukraine's defense industry and air defense. According to the president, Greece shares Ukraine's position on countering Russian aggression and is ready to contribute to further support. Well, that's right. These are the kinds of contexts that need to be established. We shouldn't forget about the Balkans either. That's important. Most of them are members of the European Union and NATO, or vice versa. That's why it's very important for us that, let's say, our cooperation is present there as well, and that the necessary votes within the EU or NATO structures are on our side. Right now, it's unclear to what extent the Balkans can help further. Well, I'll put it this way. To squeeze out Russian business or Russian oligarchs, I'm not sure that's going to happen. Whether Serbia will make a complete 180-degree turn in its policy, at the very least, that's also unlikely. But to some extent, they can push back Russian business there and perhaps transfer or sell to Ukraine some of the weaponry they still have in their warehouses, possibly of Soviet type, and not only that. Well, that possibility also exists. Meanwhile, Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, has predicted how long negotiations on a ceasefire in Ukraine might last. Well, as for how long they will last, I think those who are subscribed to my channel already know, right? You can write your thoughts in the comments. I have never said that this would be quick, and I would really like to please you and give predictions of 2 or 3 weeks, like some people once did, or say it would be just a few weeks. But I'm sorry I can't, because I prefer to tell you the truth. No hard feelings here. So, Merz said that negotiations regarding a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia will continue and may last for weeks or even months. There is currently no quick solution to the issue, says Merz. This was stated by Chancellor Friedrich Merz in an interview in a comment for Politico. And in fact, the Chancellor noted that the process has only just begun and may last many weeks, even months. I absolutely agree. There is no other way here. And you, friends, please write in the comments whether your opinion has changed about how long the negotiation process might last and when a ceasefire might be possible. From your point of view, or is it impossible at all? Maybe that's what you think? Please write it down. Very interesting. And Merz added that Germany insists on a diplomatic resolution to the war, but knows that this cannot be achieved in a short period of time. Merz also pointed out the importance of Western unity. According to him, coordination with EU partners and communication with US lawmakers will remain central elements of Germany's strategy. I want to emphasize what Merz is focusing on. He is referring to communication with US lawmakers, meaning the Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, the two chambers of the American Congress. Why is he talking specifically about this? It's very simple. Because they understand, not only in Germany, but also in other European countries, that right now Congress holds a position on Ukraine that is opposite to the one supported by Donald Trump. What is this about? In the United States, 81 out of 100 senators supported new, extremely tough sanctions aimed at economically isolating Russia and punishing third countries, particularly China, for purchasing Russian energy resources. A 500% tariff has been proposed, along with an ultimatum to Putin, either peace or an economic blockade. The legislative initiative, which provides for large-scale restrictions against Russia, received a positive response from the overwhelming majority of the US Senate. Attention! 81 out of 100 senators voted in favor of the sanctions bill. It was developed by Lindsey Graham from the Republican Party and Richard Blumenthal from the Democrats. The central element of the bill is the introduction of a 500% tariff on imports from countries that continue to buy oil, gas, uranium, or other resources from Russia. This is intended to create an economic blockade for Russia, effectively turning it into a trade pariah and further strengthening its isolation. The authors do not hide that the main goal of the sanctions is not only to weaken Russia, but also to hold China accountable for supporting the Russian war machine. Graham directly points out that it is precisely Beijing, by buying up Russian oil from the so-called shadow fleet, that allows Putin to continue the war. Without this financial support, the senators say, the Kremlin's army would not survive. Graham personally held talks with the Chinese ambassador in Washington. The ambassador assured him that China supports a diplomatic resolution. And now, friends, here comes the most interesting part. Will the Senate, will Congress as a whole go against Trump? I think that none of the scenarios can be ruled out. They will be monitoring, they will be conducting polls, those surveys, sociological studies about what voters think, about how satisfied they are with the actions of Trump and the Republican Party, respectively, regarding various political aspects, including policies aimed at containing both Russia and China, and they will draw appropriate conclusions. Therefore, as soon as senators and members of Congress see that it becomes more advantageous for them to even go against Trump's wishes, who keeps insisting that now is not the time for sanctions, but rather for listening to yet another round of Putin's senseless, manipulative, and deceptive promises, well, then various scenarios become possible. And that's why I just want to remind you that it all started with about 50 senators supporting this initiative, then it became 72, and now it's 81. In other words, that's even more than two-thirds of those in the Senate who are considering supporting such a bill. Obviously, we're talking about both Republicans and Democrats, and that's why I think that taking into account the growing criticism of Trump, both within the US and abroad, the position of European partners, and the stance of Congress, they will still, as well as the American media, which, whether you like it or not, Trump may call fake news, may not read, may ignore their opinions, but there are many Americans and people around the world who do read them, who analyze this, and in principle, to some extent, agree. That's why I think it's quite possible that it will be the Senate, specifically Congress, that could play a key role in persuading Trump. Or maybe they won't be able to. I hope most likely that they will. Because with Putin, it's something almost magical. Well, it's like Krasnov syndrome. Again, I didn't want to bring up the issue of Agent Krasnov, but let's be honest, it really does seem like that. Meanwhile, while Congress and the Senate are taking a more pro-Ukrainian stance, the US State Department isn't really, because US Secretary of State Rubio stated that the United States will conduct a full review of all aid provided to Ukraine in recent years. So, if any violations are found, appropriate measures will be taken. Obviously, all our aid will be reviewed, Rubio stated during his speech in Congress. He reminded that spending oversight is carried out by inspectors general, including a special inspector responsible for monitoring aid to Ukraine. According to Rubio, if any cases of abuse or illegal appropriation of funds are discovered, the United States will definitely respond. We have continued to provide significant support to Ukraine, but this war must come to an end. There is no military solution, only negotiations. The sooner this happens, the fewer casualties, destruction, and losses there will be. The main priority of the American administration is to put an end to the war once and for all. Okay, go ahead and do it. We'll do something about Putin at last, besides statements, besides appeals, besides slogans. Send more weapons to Ukraine. Give us the ability to strike with ATACMS, to take out their military infrastructure, at least here, in the nearby zone. Stop them. Force Putin to agree to at least a ceasefire. This will be a demonstration of the very will to end the war, which everyone will see in the US, in Ukraine, and in European countries. Actions must speak louder than words. That's all there is to it in this situation. Meanwhile, sanctions may be imposed against Hungary in the European Union. A group of members of the European Parliament has called for a complete freeze on funding for Hungary. A group of members of the European Parliament on Wednesday called on Brussels to freeze all funding allocated to Hungary, accusing the country of further restricting freedoms and undermining democracy, as well as failing to comply with EU laws and values. On May 27th, the EU Council will discuss stripping Hungary of its voting rights in the European Union. Well, that's absolutely right. And I think such issues should also be carefully considered with regard to Slovakia or anyone else who tries to throw a wrench into the common European policy. Otherwise, basically, they joined, essentially entered the European Union, and are now trying to block and torpedo everything the European Union stands for: the rule of law, democracy, freedom, and what Ukraine is currently fighting for. Meanwhile, the Atlantic Council notes that the EU could tighten the screws on the Kremlin even further. And the 18th package of sanctions, which is already being developed, the 17th was just recently adopted, and the 18th promises to be the toughest yet. Despite already having a 17th package of sanctions, the EU still has significant potential to increase pressure on Russia. The upcoming 18th package could become the toughest yet. Discussions are underway about restricting pro-Russian banks, the energy sector, as well as a complete shutdown of the so-called shadow fleet, a key tool Russia uses to circumvent oil price caps and earn windfall profits. In addition, the EU is being urged to impose secondary sanctions against countries that assist Russia. Well, of course, that's necessary. This is not the main element, and sanctions are not a cure-all. The main remedy is definitely to destroy military infrastructure, factories, and defense industrial enterprises on Russian territory, to drive out the occupier from the occupied territories, and meanwhile, of course, to impose sanctions. Sanctions are an auxiliary tool. They are important, they hit the wallet, but they cannot be considered the main one. Meanwhile, a new round of negotiations between Ukraine and Russia will take place in the Vatican. Trump will send US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Representative for Ukraine Keith Kellogg to the negotiations. The new round of negotiations may take place in the Vatican, no longer Istanbul but the Vatican, just as I predicted, and the meeting may happen in mid-June. The Wall Street Journal notes, citing sources, that US President Trump stated in a phone conversation with European leaders that he would send Secretaries of State Marco Rubio and Kellogg to the negotiations. And in fact, Europeans will also be present there. This is also very important. So we are waiting for this event. In the meantime, friends, let us remember that no matter how difficult things get, we have our army, and we must unite around it. A people who are ready to resist, who are fighting this battle and remain determined, even though the ceasefire is being postponed. But those who listen to my channel probably had no illusions that it would happen by May or in May. No, the enemy must be forced into it. That's why we are working on this. We are working on unity and consolidation, on destroying the enemy and achieving positive, victorious results for us. Despite everything, we are capable of this and we will succeed. Take care of yourselves and glory to Ukraine.